I had heard at a previous meeting that y'all were kicking around removing the houses that were there along the Paluxy and widening the street. Was that a serious idea?
Well, that's...
And moving them into Heritage Park because the other...
Well, that would be one way to get them out of the floodplain and be able to reuse them. The problem is now, you have to understand the reason for that comment. I don't know that that's going to be a recommendation, but the reason for it is that it's going to be difficult for somebody to reinvest in those buildings that's going to flood, and they can't change them. So if they're going to be like they are, they're just going to be like they are, and we're never going to get the redevelopment down there that we really want, because nobody's going to make the reinvestment in there because they flood all the time. And so, or they don't flood all the time. That's not a fair statement, but they can flood. And so one idea was to maybe move them out to other areas, maybe move the historic ones, and maybe make that public land on there. They have to be bought out. I mean, they have to be, and the federal government's come in and bought. I mean, they've done it in other cities, but it's a buyout program, and you have to apply for it, and they have to go in and buy those properties from those owners. But we don't have to do that. We can just leave the things as they are. We just need to understand, because they're in the floodplain, how it's going to sort of inhibit reinvestment in those areas.
That kind of addresses the point I made earlier. You know, do we want to look a little further in the future and either think that we might go in that direction, or we're not going to go in that direction? But if we think we might, then I would think we'd want to restrict somebody going in there now and bringing dump truckloads of fill in there and filling it up. You know, one parcel there, and then everything else we want to turn into a linear park in the floodplain. So
I think one place we look at is that Reynolds Bend over there, the housing development, because their yards, the slopes on the yards are pretty dramatic.
Which, I mean, we've seen it. It's already happened a few years back on the Paluxy. Do we want? I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm saying I think it's something we need to consider. Do we want to allow that to continue, or do we want to say, you know what?
Right. Well, I think that's what we're about on this. I think that's what this project's about, is trying to look a little farther down the road than we have been. And it doesn't need to be in the paper that we're going in and tearing out all that stuff. That's not what we're talking about. We're trying to decide what it is that we want. We're trying to upgrade these corridors. They are important to Glen Rose. And so, in what way do we want to manage this? It's a resource. We have a resource. The resource is we have frontage along 67. We have frontage along the river. And so, how do we want to manage these two? I mean, probably one's not a resource, but it's an asset. You know, we have an asset in 67, and we're just trying to manage it. That's all we're trying to do. And we need to be a little proactive in the way we manage both of these. And that's what's important about this. So we want y'all to help with this decision. And we're spending a lot of effort, and councils told us they want you to be involved in this. They'll make the final decision, but they want you to do the work, frankly, is what they said. Sorry about that.
I think that's it's a pretty important point, and I'm sure it's going to be a very controversial point too, depending on whether you own property there, you don't own property there, and so forth. But if this is the time to do it, is that not something we'd want to bring up at the next public hearing, so that we can get so council can have a consensus, so they know?
Remember, y'all are going to recommend this, right? Remember, we're going to all agree this. We're not moving this out of the Planning and Zoning Commission till y'all recommend it. So remember, it's not us doing this.
Right.
I mean, it's us that's generating the discussion and generating the ideas, and we'll write the technical stand, we'll write the ordinance. But at the end of the day, y'all are going to recommend it, not us. We're going to recommend it to you, but y'all are going to be the ones recommending it to the council. Let's get that straight.
I just think that's an integral part of the Paluxy River District. That decision, whichever way we go, makes a huge impact one way or the other.
Well, I can tell you one thing, that when people come downtown and they come in the Heritage Center, they say what they like about Glen Rose is it looks old. And we don't want to get rid of that. They'll quit coming.
That's right.
Because as far as if we're looking at it as a zoning overlay district, in the Biloxi River Overlay Zoning District, I'm trying to think how we would implement management. As the default, those houses there would just be allowed because it's a base zoning district.
Yeah.
Right.
The beauty of it is Daniel's right. The beauty of it is everything stays. The overlay, see, the beauty about all this is it all stays, okay? But it all staying, there's issues with that too. Because it stays, you know, there's an issue with that too in the long run. And so how do we, if we want the status quo with it, I'm talking specifically about the Biloxi River District now. If we wish to have the status quo, then what does that mean for reinvestment into the district? And I think we ought to have an honest debate about that. And so keeping it as is, are we really going to get the reinvestment down there that we want?
And just to let you know, the standards in both districts, if we take a look at this is the use chart from your zoning ordinance, what we're saying is our residential uses don't have to conform to the two
forget about residential
districts. So those houses would be fine. They function just like they would in the R1 zoning district. The only residential uses that do need to comply are the ones that function more like businesses, the retirement centers, the RV, because we have RV
Bed and
and trailer
breakfast,
parks in
things like
here.
that.
So if it's really sort of a business, that's the only ones that really have to apply. Most of the residential uses are exempt from the two overlay zoning districts. So in that situation, it just functions as it always has.
So those folks can live in the houses and exist, but then when they want to turn it into a business, say somebody with an old house would like to turn it into a bed and breakfast, that's when it's triggers.
Yeah. And they'd have to actually come in for well, if it was a bed and breakfast, but if they opened up a beauty salon or a barber shop in their house, or a CPA or something of that nature, and they just. And
by the way, I don't know if they make barber shops anymore. I'll just tell you, when I was a kid, I went to one.
And it wasn't a home occupation; they weren't living there. If it was just solely a business, they'd have to come in. They would apply for a rezoning to use the land as a business. So that's sort of where they fall into the regulations of the overlay. So residential use stays the same.
What Daniel's saying is if we try to get to, it's called retention or detention, if we start trying to retain flow on individual tracks, that's going to destroy the whole look and feel too. So that doesn't make sense. And so the real solution is some sort of a long-term drainage solution to the Biloxi River through town. I don't know what that is, but that's the real solution. That's the real long-term solution. But unfortunately, you know, the floodplains, they tend to get bigger rather than smaller. The reason they tend to get bigger is because there's usually more development upstream, more concrete, and it runs off quicker. When it runs off quicker, it goes to Biloxi, it goes down quicker, and it gets the floodplain gets a little wider and a little wider. So the bad news is that, you know, the more development upstream that there is, you know, it could change that floodplain along Biloxi and make it bigger. So now it's at the courthouse. 20 years from now, it could be here. I don't know. I mean, you don't know, but there's studies that can prove that out.
Yeah.